Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this is the podcast for you.
Hey team, and welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. So today we've turned one of our most frequent listener questions into a podcast topic in themselves, and that is how Aidan and I would approach gaining access to a new property. So specifically, once we've actually attained access to that property or parcel of land, and we're going to have tips and tactics, whether it be just that 300 to 500 acre property leading up all the way to, a Northern Territory size or North Queensland size property where it might be 100,000 to 500,000 acres where you've got so much country to cover and you're just trying to find out where the animals live and, try and quicken the learning curve on becoming successful on that place. We'll also be answering your FAQs that you guys send in. If you have an FAQ, please make sure to email us at info@twinelements.com.au. Equally, send it through on the socials. That's through Instagram or Facebook. So you can send that through to the Twin Elements account or on Instagram, James Doumtsis Outdoors or Aidan Doumtsis Outdoors, and we'll answer your question there, but we'll also put it on a future podcast and just share it amongst the community that we're trying to build here so people can learn from each other. So without further ado, we'll jump into the podcast.
Venture Hunting and Outdoors is Australia's premier hunting retailer, with the mission to give Australian outdoorsmen and women the resource they deserve. Venture started from a team of passionate hunters and has transformed into a community. Through group events, top quality gear, exclusive deals, and expert guidance, Venture is more than a hunting store. Check out their website today to see what epic deals are available.
So let's assume that you've got a new parcel of land. Hopefully it's an area that you've always wanted to gain access to particularly a new species or potentially, better country with more access to, better numbers of quarry or bigger game, better genetics, any of those things. And you've got access, which we'll do in its own podcast, how we sort of go about gaining access in a future podcast episode. But today it's purely going to be around you've got that access. It's the first time you're going to a property, and we're going to split that up, whether it's, super far away and you're going to allocate 2 or 3 days of going up there and scouting it for the first time, or whether it's, even just that half an hour away from your home and it's quite easy to go and get access. Equally, it's going to be broken up into if it's sort of there's going to be different tactics if it's a 500 to 1,000 acre property, or if it's something in the 10,000 acres, or if it's something in the hundreds of thousands of acres. So the first tip that I would recommend is hopefully where roughly the property is. The closer to home it is, the easier that obviously is to understand. But hopefully if you've got a rough idea or potentially a drop pin from a farmer or something like that, what you can do is do some e-scouting before you even get there. And that's just going to help with the steps that come, in the sequence to understand and sort of start building sort of that hunt model or a bit of a dialogue between where you think the animals are going to be and located, where they're going to move around, sleep, eat, water on this new block. And it's also going to help take into account the next step, which leads into building a relationship with the property owner. And so what that entails is hopefully you've spoken to the cocky, the property owner, the manager, whoever your source is, and you start to build a bit of a repertoire of not only the animals that are available to hunt on this place, but also, you can start picking up little cues whether this is going to be sort of a low density situation or whether there's going to be, hundreds of the quarry that you're trying to chase, and it's not going to be a problem finding game. But one of the biggest things I really like to do is before I even step boots on the ground, try and have a bit of a chat with the property owner and get a bit of information around how often they're seeing the animals. And if there's any particular areas or like they might just mention, oh, it's around the house, or yeah, got a big swamp out the back or something like that, which you can then go back and take to e-scouting. I can't believe how much time nowadays, especially during a hunt, that I spend on my maps, between hunts I spend on my maps, constantly trying to learn where these animals travel corridors and from bedding areas to feeding areas and water, and just try and piece it all together. The more that I use maps, the more I understand, and the more cross correlation between species, even within Australia and, hunting abroad. So, there's plenty of things that I've learned from hunting red deer that I can extrapolate to hunting elk. And equally, there's plenty of things that I've learned from hunting goats here in Australia that I can learn from hunting, tara and chamois and stuff like that in New Zealand. So it's incredible what little tiny pieces of information you can pick up from being really detailed. You can then cross correlate to other species. So following on from that, and doing a bit of e-scouting, preparing at home, and talking to the property owner, just setting up expectations on, what you can expect to sort of experience on this property. And with that, I sort of put a little disclaimer in the sense that some property owners are really, really onto it. I've had like Aiden and I and Dad are quite fortunate to have a fair few properties in, a lot of parts of Australia, just because we've put in so much time and effort into acquiring those properties. And they come with a true mixed bag of sort of experience levels, I guess, from the property owner, in the sense that I've had people be like, yeah, mate, we never see deer and pigs on here. Like, it's so rare, but you can come out and have a look. And you go out for your first hunt and you see like a mob of like 30 pigs and there's just pigs everywhere. And then it just turns out that, well, they're a pretty low input beef farmer and they just sort of put cattle in a paddock, never really drive around. They check, there might be older farmers, so their vision isn't the best, or, like they might be like, oh yeah, we never really see deer, but there's like a little hidden oasis out the back of 1,000 acres that they don't put the cattle in because it's too rough country and it's just full of deer. But talking to the property owner and setting up the expectations of what you're expecting to see on this hunt is definitely one of the first criteria. What I also like to do is try and organise a time to meet up with the property owner and actually get them to drive you around. Now, hopefully, if the property is 50,000 acres upwards, it may end up being just something where you go and have a cup of tea and they show you on maps and do a couple of pins from the kitchen table. But if it's something around that, 1,000, 2,000 up to even 10 and 20,000 acres, I do really like to try and organise a time, normally on a weekend, because obviously the farmers have a bit more time then, or the manager or whoever it is that you've got access through, or even if it's, getting them, like you've got access through the property owner, but there's a manager that can show you around. I really, really like going out there and, getting a bit of a lay of the land. And one of the most important things to establish, whether it's around the coffee table or in the back of a Polaris or a Cruiser or whatever you're in, is to try and establish, obviously, where the property boundaries are, because there's nothing worse, and it looks terrible if, they're like, yeah, these are the rough boundaries, and then on the first time you go out there, you're found in the neighbour's place by accident, assuming that it just hasn't been done poorly. So you've got a bit of sort of hunter ethics and etiquette in these situations too, where you're trying to represent hunting in the best fashion, and making sure you're in property lines and where you should be should be high on the list of everyone's agenda, especially the first time or the first couple of times they go out, just making sure that, you're putting hunting in a whole in its best light. But in this time where you're driving around with the property owner, I should mention, I do like to normally get the property owner, a carton of beers or something like that, just to say thank you and really start sort of fast tracking that relationship. People, it's such a small gesture. It might be $60, $100, whatever, you buy them a bowl of grog. And it does go a long way in, obviously they're investing time into your hunting, really. But it does go a long way in sort of starting to build that relationship with property owners. I can honestly say some of these property owners have become really, really good mates along the years, especially with how often I'm going hunting and how often I'm going out there. But they become a really good resource and wealth of knowledge, especially early on, but also just almost scouting for you, which we'll get to a bit later on in the podcast. But one of the first questions I like to ask is, essentially when you're driving around, I like to turn my tracking system on. So we just use GPS kit in this function. And I just say to them, hey, are you happy if I turn the tracking log on, which is obviously going to mark all the roads, which helps so many times, especially in like bigger properties where the roads are not great and it's pretty rough country or poor country. Like I can't think how many times I've taken a left when I should have gone right, and then you've driven 500 meters on what you think is a track, and you're like, mate, this is not right. And you look back and you've got that track. You're like, oh shit, I should have been back there. So that's a huge little tip that's helped me so many times, especially when, generally speaking, as we'll get to, the next time I'm going out there is like early morning in a future hunt, and having directions in the dark when you're trying to be sneaky or you have your lights on low or whatever can be a real help, just having that tracking feature going. The other thing I like to do is put pins in and take photos with them attached potentially. If you find, if old mate says, oh, these are really good pig wallows, or, this is where the pigs often go through, this is a bedding area, whatnot, this is where I often see them, you can just start putting pins in and start sort of painting the picture, and then later on look back and you've got all these sort of resources to look back on when you're hunting there, but also at home when you're sort of scouting again. But one of the favorite questions that I like to ask people is, if you had to shoot whatever you're targeting, whether it be pigs, goats, deer, where would you go? And I think that just sort of paints a picture of, because these farmers, generally speaking, know their properties really well. And, like animals do things commonly in the same places at the same time. So if they can say, oh, mate, I've been seeing a couple of big fallow bucks on this crop for the last couple of weeks, it's like, okay, well, cool. That's where I'm going to go and check out first. But equally speaking, they might be like, oh yeah, this swamp or this area for goats or this gully for fox whistling or whatever it may be. And so just trying to get their input and putting it in a frame of mind, because I've had people be like, oh, they're just everywhere. But it's like, no. That's cool that you reckon the pigs are everywhere or the goats are everywhere or the deer are everywhere. But it's like, no, where would you go? Like if you had to go and shoot one, where would you go? Because that's generally going to be sort of the best spot and the spot that I'm going to sort of emphasize the most time in. Not to say that I'm going to not check out the whole property or the rest of the property. Like I'm going to be scouring every single inch of even this couple of 100,000 acres. But it's like, where do I need to start narrowing my time down into? I think another thing to sort of start setting up the expectations from and having a bit of a conversation when you're in the car with the farmer or the cocky is, what is sort of their objective management wise with the animals that you're targeting. So, it may be, if you're hunting pigs on crop, for example, it's like, mate, go and literally exterminate every single one you see. If it's foxes during lambing time or wild dogs during lambing time or whatever, it may be, mate, go and kill every single one that you see. If it's if it's deer or goats or pigs or whatever, like it could be anything, and people be like, oh yeah, no, I actually really like seeing them, around the place, and I don't care that like the red deer come up and like swim in the dam at the house, but like if you see a good one, you can shoot it. I think it's really important just to set up those expectations with the property owner really early on, just so there's no misunderstandings. Like you go out there and shoot, 10 red deer, for example, because you want to make salami and heap of sausages and stuff, and they go, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. And then you lose access, and then they probably have a negative association with hunting in the future. And, then other hunters can't get on the place, and they talk, and, they came out and they shot all the deer and blah, so just setting up that expectation with hunters and just having everyone on the same page, I think is really important, and just getting an understanding of what sort of the property owner wants in terms of management. And I've had people that like are literally neighbors, and it's the complete opposite, where some are like, no, the pigs are fine here. If you shoot a couple or whatever, that's fine. And then the neighbor's like, nah, mate, shoot every single one you see. So just setting that up is definitely important. But when you're driving around, any key features that you see, definitely marking in. I also like to start asking questions around, potentially areas around that sort of structure, feed or shelter, and bedding areas, feeding areas or better feed and water. So, when you're on a dam, if they've got time, get out and have a look. Is there any wallows? If it's, pigs or rooster or sambar or reds. In terms of feeding areas, asking if they've got like any crops in or any improved pasture, especially like if there's a lot of native bush and then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, we've got like, 1,000 acres of oak crop here, then that's obviously going to be a big winner for a lot of species. Equally, if there's like improved just general native pastures compared to like like thick bushy native scrub and stuff, that's going to be a draw winner. One of my favorite questions, as you've probably picked up, is asking where the cattle or the sheep or the stock are specifically. And I think that just because obviously like the game that we hunt don't often like being with stock. I think that's for multiple reasons. So obviously the competition for feed as a resource is definitely one of them. But if you can imagine, like if you're sleeping somewhere under a log being a pig, and you've got cattle walking all around you, it's going to be pretty nervous when you're like on edge all the time. So yeah, they often bed up in those sort of more quieter areas, and they're not afraid to walk to find those sort of areas, those secluded areas, pockets that are a bit quieter. I think it's also good to try and understand, like, just for your own mind and starting to build your hunt plan and your hunt picture, how much pressure these hunters and how many other hunters sort of hunt this block or this property, because it can vary hugely between properties, but it can also just vary hugely between areas. Like, I've seen pigs and deer and all the rest of it where you can see them from the house and they're so chill, like they're pretty much pets. They're almost more domestic than they are wild. And, no one really hunts there, and you get access and it's like the mecca of hunting, and they're like, yep, just shoot one stag sort of thing. And, it's really good for photos and videos and all that stuff. Equally, you've got places that get dogged every weekend, and, the pigs are getting shot constantly on crop and, all the time. And there's guys with thermals, and, there's a huge amount of hunting pressure, because it just sort of sets up the precedence of how far you think these animals are going to be traveling, where, especially between feed, water and bedding, like, if there's not a lot of hunting pressure, well, they're happy to just sleep under any tree in an open paddock because they know they're not going to get shot. Whereas if you've got huge amounts of hunting pressure, just say on cropping country, for example, well, I know pigs that have walked upwards of like 10 kilometers to go and smash a sorghum crop overnight, but I'm not expecting to really find that many pigs in the line of trees immediately right next to where the crop is, for example. So just those little things, just to start painting the picture on, the animal and species that you're hunting. And every single animal is going to have its own little sort of features and facets. So, it depends on what animals you're sort of targeting in this place. And a property, there's nothing for a property to have multiple species. Like, it's nothing to have chittle and pigs and wild dogs and feral cats, or it may be, here in New South Wales, it may be that it's got fallow and reds and pigs and goats and foxes. But if you're trying to go there and shoot a 40-inch billy, well, I'm probably going to be looking up in more of the rougher country, up high, rather than, low down on the flats. Not to say that you can't find them there. Equally, if you're looking for fallow and reds, you're probably going to be looking more on improved pastures. With pigs, you're going to be looking more probably around water courses and stuff like that, but also just, similarly improved pastures, open benches, that type of thing. There is a lot of crossover between these species, but each one does have its little sort of specific facets that lead you to, if you're looking at this particular block, where I'd sort of be tailoring my search to and trying to look there first for that particular animal.
Know where you stand with Onyx, the most accurate GPS mapping tech for outdoor enthusiasts, featuring land ownership maps that work offline, trusted by millions of hunters worldwide. We utilise Onyx while hunting in the United States on James's elk hunt of a lifetime. Being able to plan and prepare for our hunts allowed us to go farther and hunt with confidence.
So now that the property owner showed you around, he or she has hopefully given you a fairly good idea. I mean, you potentially, if there's heaps of animals on this place, then, we're probably not so much talking to you guys. This next step that I'm about to say is definitely probably something that, whether there's thousands of animals on this place or whether there's only a handful, I think is a really important step which people overlook. So hold tight for that. But yeah, hopefully you've got a bit of a lay of the land. You've got the roads all in, you've got the dams all marked in, whether that be 1,000 acres or 100,000 acres. And biggest and most important feature is you've got the expectations set up with the property owner on how you're going to be hunting, where you're going to be hunting, but also the property boundaries, just to make sure that you've got that all keyed in and you're not found on the wrong place. And then there's no sort of, I didn't know sort of thing. It's like, no, that's it. And just you're representing hunting here, remember, as well, guys. So just make sure you're doing the right thing. But now that you've got the first step completed, my next step is actually covering as much country as possible as quickly as I can. So if we were looking this as, somewhere local, it's probably not going to be that same day. You may go out for a hunt in the afternoon or whatever, assuming it was on the weekend. But I actually like to do this preferably in the morning. And if it's on a place that's over, 5,000 acres, generally speaking, that's me in the car driving and getting out and glassing specific sort of spots, I guess. So the biggest thing that I wanted to mention here, I guess, is like the first trip out, I'm not expecting to get something or kill something. If I do get a stalk on something and get to shoot something, well, that's a huge bonus. But if it's, the first time me going to a place, like what I'm trying to accomplish is I'm almost investing in my future hunting in this place. And it's specifically set up as trying to learn as much as I can about the property as fast as I can. Because in the end of the day, 90% of animals and game live in only 10% of the country. And so it may be a property that's, rife with game. There's just fallow deer everywhere and you can't walk a wrong direction without seeing one. But having said that, within that, there is still going to be better places on that property to hunt. So there's going to be little honey holes where the bucks like to hang out. There's going to be bigger bucks in certain areas. It's the same for pigs. It's the same for reds. It's the same for chital, all this type of thing. So what I like to do is I actually like to do this as a morning hunt because, generally speaking, the game are going to be out and about more. And what I like to do, depending on the species I'm hunting, I like to target, where I think the game's going to be. So if it's like up in Queensland, for example, and it's chital or rooster deer or something like that, you're probably going to be targeting flats. So getting to the edge of flats and glassing is going to be a key component. If it's red deer or fallow deer or even pigs, generally speaking, I'm going to be targeting the best feed possible. So for deer, that's going to be like improved pastures. It's going to be crops potentially, given if it's depending on the area. If it's sambar, it's going to be, the same thing, good feeding areas leading into sort of thicker gullies and that type of thing, fringe country. Pigs, it's going to be feed, but also potentially like swamps and watercourses, depending on, if they're available, if you're in sort of North Queensland. Same thing for buffalo, bandang. It's going to be feeding areas. So everything that you can really expect. The only exception really here is goats, where, I'm expecting them to be camped up fairly high on a hill at first light. And they're probably the only animal here in Australia that I actually like to scout more in the middle of the day, because I find them to be out. They sort of park up in the night and then come down off the hill into sort of easier, gentler country to feed. But not to say that, they're on the move generally within sort of half an hour of first light. So it's not like, if you were there at first light, you're going to be missing or wasting too much time. But I think, like I said, what I like to do, especially in the mountains, is actually drive around. I don't care about bumping game because I'll normally pin those spots and it starts sort of the learning process and, the thoughts ticking over. And I just like to cover as much country as I possibly can. And so what I'm trying to do is pick the most likely areas, as I've said, and then just keep moving on from there. So anything less than probably 3,000 or 4,000 acres, I'd probably just do it on foot. If it's flat land, I'd probably just drive it still, to be honest, just so I can cover it as quickly as possible while the game's moving around. Like you probably only have that golden 1 or 2 hours, depending on pressure and what sort of country and stuff it is. If it's only like a 500 to 1,000 acre place, I'm pretty much always like, I'll just walk that. There's not really much point in driving that. But I use the expression drive slow or walk fast. So if it's, 50,000 acres even, hopefully from having driven around or had a coffee table meeting with the cocky, you can work out, and this may be the next morning that you're going out, or that afternoon, for example, or it may be that if it's a place that's close to you, you've gone and done the drive with the cocky, and then you've come home, you've done a little bit of e-scouting, revised what he said or she said, and then you've gone out for another hunt later on. But I'd be trying to target the areas that he specifically or she specifically spoke about in your sort of initial meeting. And during those areas, or the sort of higher frequent areas where you think the game's going to be, that's where I'd stop, actually spend a bit of time glassing. Like I said, if you see, like if you get to the first swamp and there's a good boar on there, like go and stalk it. Like I'm not saying just like blatantly ignore it and, go and check the next swamp, whatever. But I'm just saying the objective of this first visit, preference covering as much country as you possibly can. So if I'm in the mountains and it's 3,000 or 4,000 acres, then I'm going to be getting up as high as I can at first light and glassing as much country as I possibly can. And I'm just going to be moving around, trying to see all different areas, on the neighbour's place, everything like that, and just sort of get expectations of what game are in the area, what the trophy potential is, how many animals are around, And this is more just like I said, for those with sort of general densities. I mean, if there's a mob of 100 pigs on a crop, well, it's pretty easy that you're just going to be hunting the crop. But even having said that, you still want to learn where those animals are sort of feeding and then going to as the day progresses and moves on. So it's really important to start building that sort of whole image. And I think that's what separates, a good hunter from a great hunter, is just how observant they are. And just observing those animal behaviors and trying to really paint the whole picture and work it all out. Like it's one thing to, just drive around and spotlight and thermal animals and that type of thing. But it's another one to know, okay, it's this weather condition, it's overcast, it's rainy, the wind is coming in from this direction, and I think that the deer are probably going to go and bed over here. Like that just shows that you sort of have a whole understanding of animal behavior. And also, like, this may vary between property to property, but a lot of it can also be extrapolated for that game species across, like I've said, Australia and abroad. So it just makes you become a much better comprehensive hunter. It means that you can be thrown into any hunting environment, generally speaking, on any property, and you can always draw on information from things that you've learned. And that's just going to quicken your success and your learning curve, but also mean that you're just going to be a much better hunter going forward. So whether I'm walking and glassing or whether I'm driving and glassing, I find it really important to always be recording what I'm seeing. So whether that's travel corridors with really good rubs, or whether you find a sambar deer wallow, or whether you see deer in themselves, record it and take photos, because like I said, you're starting to build that sort of hunt portfolio of what you expect and where game are going to be. And like I said, again, I keep drilling this into you guys, 90% of the game are only in 10% of the country. So especially on these bigger parcels of land, like there's going to be a lot of higher sort of frequently used areas, whether it be feeding or watercourses and that type of thing. And there's going to be a lot of vast country where, yes, they pass through, but it's not very common. On the smaller parcels of land, sadly, it's sort of only what you're given, and sometimes it may mean that you're waiting for that opportunity for a deer or a pig to jump the fence and come onto your side. But hopefully you've got a little bit of a shelter set up, or food or water, and they need to come onto your place. Another important thing that I've found is always walking or coming out a different route. So I even try and do this just in a general hunt. Most of the time, you're hunting with the wind on your face. And so most of the time you're walking out with a crosswind or the wind on your back. I always try and walk out, even if it's like a different elevation on a ridge, or on the different side of a ridge, or, even if it's go and cut out an extra kilometre to go and check a dam or a watercourse or a creek or a bedding area, because it's so many times I've went and put in that extra little, it's not even that hard. We're talking about an extra kilometre here, guys. Like, go and check out that little extra spot, and I can't believe how many times it's paid dividends. And I'll use the example of Aiden's red stag, the really, really magnificent one that he got this year. That was purely because I walked down a different ridge in the rain. It was pissing rain. I wanted to be in the car, but I was like, nah, I'm going to walk down this side of the ridge instead of this ridge. It was only an extra couple of meters, 100 meters, and ended up finding this little soak, which had been turned into a red deer wallow, and there was shitloads of tracks around it. And so instead of me walking out the route that I normally walked out, which, the red deer were using, but not as frequently, I'd learned, okay, well, yes, it's an extra 500 meters, just say, but walk out this route and it will pay, and you're going to be more likely to see a red deer on the walk out. Well, as you've heard the story, we were walking out and we heard that roar, which we definitely wouldn't have been able to hear if I was on the, other side of the ridge that we'd walked, or the original walk that I did on the way in. And that led to Aiden shooting a massive red deer. So it just shows to you guys, like, and I've got, hundreds of these stories where I've even driven out different areas, instead of going out the shortest way, you might take like a slightly different drive out, and you see a deer in an area and you're like, oh, that's weird. And then you go and then you work out that, or they actually come here and bed, or they come here and feed, or this is a watercourse or whatever. And just making sure that you sort of putting in time to, you may think that you've got it all worked out and everything's perfect, but just making sure that you're constantly sort of checking and testing those theories, because, once you think you've sort of learnt everything, I guess that's when sadly it sort of dies and ends from there. And there's plenty to learn, even for someone that, thinks they're super experienced from lesser hunters, but also just continuously testing theories and trying to learn more for themselves.
Whether you're making your way up a scree cliff or hiking a distant trail, You want to be confident in the boots that you wear, and for Aiden and I, that means lower. We've been running the Lower Ranger GTX 3s for over 5 years now, and we've never even had a blister. We've teamed up with the Lower team to extend their generosity to you to get you a unique 10% off code by using the code TWINELEMENTS10 at checkout to get 10% off your next order. We know you're going to love them.
So now that we've done the drive with the property owner and we've put a bit of time in ourselves, I mean, we may have even been successful depending on the densities and depending if you got lucky. But generally speaking, like I said earlier, I like to spend a lot of time on maps, and this is where I'll actually go home and be looking at my phone, normally looking at probably GPS kit, even though it hasn't got the 3D function. I'm normally looking at that, all the pins and the tracks and stuff that I've put in, and I'll normally go and get like a Google Earth or something like that, and I'll start overlaying what I've learned and where I may have seen game or where I may have seen sign, and start sort of creating that hunt plan for future, hunts. So might have been like, okay, that gully that I walked looked awesome. This is a similar gully, maybe 500 meters up, that I think also the pigs will be bedding in or using or whatever. Or, it'd be like, oh, this bench had a heap of sign and had a heap of goats on it. Here's one on the opposite face that, has better sun, for example. So I think they'll probably use that on overcast days where it's sunny, and they might want to come out and sun themselves in if it's cold here in New South Wales. Or, it might be like, oh, there's a really good feeding area there, and so you might get pigs or fallow deer or whatever on last light. Equally, okay, this swamp looks really good. It's out the back, so it's probably a bit more quiet and secluded. I didn't get a chance to go out there this trip, but I'll definitely make sure I'll go out and head out there, in future trips. And one thing I should have said with learning, and walking out a different way is, I think it's important to invest in, your hunts every so often in going a different route, but also just doing a completely different hunt that you on the same place that you haven't, you may have hunted a block for years and years and years, but just going to a different sort of area on the block and exploring that. Like, I can't think of how many times I've thought, oh yeah, this is like really good, and then, especially on these bigger blocks, and then you go and walk like a completely random stretch of the creek or a completely different range, which, you thought was didn't have as many deer or many pigs, but it turns out, well, that's where the big bucks or the big reds actually go because it's so quiet and no one goes there and hunts. And I think just sort of, once again, like exploring those theories and just trying to cover as much country as possible. Like, there's obviously those honey holes, and going back to those ones pay dividends, but having new ones and learning more about the country that you hunt is really important too, because I think it sort of stretches yourself as a hunter. And I see it all too often with hunters where they've got one or two really good walks, just say on a 3,000 to 5,000 acre property, or even potentially bigger, like it might be a 10 or 50,000 acre place where it's like, yeah, I always see deer at the house, or I always see pigs on this swamp and stuff. And then it works out that they've been going to a place for 3 years, and then they work out that there's actually a better swamp just out the back that they've never been to. And so just trying to explore new country and put in a bit of time, just checking out new country. And it may not pay dividends straight away, but I guarantee you eventually, you'll find a new honey hole, and it'll be way better than the one that you first thought you had. That's obviously mainly for the bigger properties, but even if you've got, 500 to 1,000 acres, it could potentially be that you always walk this route, in this certain direction, or, something like that, and just trying to walk in from a different elevation, or try and discover some new areas. Or, you might walk this exact game trail, but you walk one 50 meters different, and then, you work out that, oh, there's a couple more samba beds, for example, in this area. Okay, well, that changes everything. Like, I shouldn't be walking on that lower game trail. I should be walking on this higher game trail. And like, I think we get innately very like habitual and stuck in our ways, especially with hunts where it's like, it's worked so many times when I walk this higher game trail and stuff. But just trying to constantly learn and just see, if I do walk lower, what happens. And I'm not talking about every hunt, just mixing it up. Like, obviously if you're successful and have your hunts planned, then that's great. But every so often, just mixing it up, it may be a different route in or a completely different hunting area. And just see what happens, because often it might surprise you and you might learn something new, but it may also increase your odds of becoming successful. And I mean, if you're doing the same thing, you're probably going to get similar results. And if that results are working for you, then that's fine. But yeah, you definitely want to be definitely want to be pushing the boundaries of sort of the standards, I guess, of which you're hunting. So now in this little section, I just want to get the cogs turning in your head and maybe just help some of our newer hunters in terms of getting them thinking around what I mentioned earlier with sort of shelter and bedding areas, feeding areas and watercourses, and obviously those transition areas in between. So as I said, it really does depend on the hunting pressure for how far animals will travel to and from each of these important features in their life. But there is definitely some specific requirements, I guess, and sort of nuances with each species. So specifically starting with deer species. So mainly like chital deer and rusa, predominantly they are going to be like rusa are and chital deer both on the the coast here in New South Wales, but predominantly speaking, they're mainly sort of Queensland species. And we commonly find them actually around the house. So looking, around the house is going to be a big feature for chital deer and rusa. The other thing that is really important is they like those sort of those big flats just for improved feed. Like generally the cattle are feeding on there too, but it's sort of shorter pick grass, quite sweet, and they can get a lot of feed intake of really good nutrients quite quickly. With pigs, it's mainly sort of I'd be targeting sort of watercourses and making sure that, because pigs potentially need a wallow, so that's going to be a good indication, but they also really like rooting up. So with that as well, if you've got a really rainy, drizzly day, as we're sort of leading into here in winter, I find that a really good day to get out and try and find the pigs because they love rooting up. So it can be a great way to find a pretty handy boar in the middle of the day. But pigs also being monogastrics, meaning they only have one stomach, they also are sort of limited in terms of how roughage can be broken down in their stomach. So they need really high starch, so low fiber foods. So that's why they like a lot of bulbs. They like rooting up. They like dead carcasses, obviously being omnivores. But they also like lush, short grass as well because it's low fiber, high sugars or starch, which enables them to break it down in their stomach. So that's definitely going to be something that we'll be targeting pigs on. And they have a fair bit of crossover with deer species in the sense that with feeding, if there's crops, if there's oats or sorghum or turnips, then obviously that's going to draw a lot of these critters in for miles, especially red deer, fallow deer and pigs. They love all of the above, and they're going to get in on those crops. And with high hunting pressure, as I said earlier, they may travel miles to get to a crop, and they can pack in, enough daily intake in these crops in an hour or two. So it's nothing for them to walk 3 or 4 hours from a bedding area to, one of these crops, hit it in the middle of the night, 12 o'clock till 2 a.m. and then start their walk back. And, they've obviously done a lot of crop damage in that time. With lower pressures, it's nothing to find them at first light and last light still on the crops. It just depends how close to bedding areas they are. With red deer, especially being bigger animals, they like improved pastures because they need a lot of energy to keep those wheels turning. Fallow deer also can be found on improved pastures. Sambar deer really like those fringe country. So obviously, same thing, trying to target those improved pastures because the native bush is quite low productive and quite high fibrousy sort of materials. So same thing with anything that wallows. So as I said, like the rusa, the sambar, the reds, I'm always going to be targeting water with all of these species because there's going to be certain water courses, whether it be because it's up in a secluded gully or, it may be that there's a bit of feed close by that they're going to target and favor more so. So taking that into account, some animals also with my scouting, so red deer and pigs and those type of things, like they don't really like the cold, especially those really, really cold mornings. And so I may take that into account, especially coming into winter here in New South Wales. There's nothing to get into the negative degrees. So looking on those east-facing slopes, first thing in the morning, you may pick up some reds or any species really, depending on how cold it gets. I think a big thing to think about here is like not to sort of overcomplicate it as well. It's one thing that we, go and hunt and walk all over the mountains and, sometimes you find the critters right at your front doorstep. Like I can't think of how many pigs and chital I've shot, within a kilometre of a homestead after doing a huge walk, or you've done a huge walk and the animals are right at your car. So just keep into account like all these animal factors and overlay all the sort of things that you've learnt and topography factors, and you'll start to build a really, really good idea of where these animals are going to be hanging out and where they're going to be frequenting. And the last topic that we're going to cover is using trial cameras and also using the cocky or the manager or the owner of the property almost as a scouting tool and agent. So I've pretty much got all my property owners on speed dial. I talk to them more frequently, but especially if you're looking for that trophy of a lifetime or a sort of more of a trophy animal, getting them looking out for you as well and even sending you photos and pictures and stuff really helps. Especially if you're hunting some of these lower density areas. You know, I love it when someone messages me and says, hey, I just saw a massive buck, you know, on this ridge or whatever. And you're like, oh shit, I've actually got nothing on tomorrow afternoon. I'll quickly whip out for a hunt. Or, you know, someone says, oh, you know, there's sambar deer, I've been seeing them every morning here or whatever. Like, if the property owners are on your side, and that's why I really think that first step with sort of giving them a carton of beer or, you know, a bottle of something and starting to build that relationship and getting them on side as almost a friend rather than just someone you're using for access is really important, because they are going to do so much of the heavy lifting in terms of scouting and stuff. And like I said, especially if you're trying to find that bigger next level of trophy, they're really, really going to help you out. Another really key tool is using trial cameras, because, you know, as we are so time poor nowadays, you know, trying to get out to the mountains, especially if it's a block that's, you know, in North Queensland and you live in Sydney, or it's in, you know, the Hunter Valley and you're in Melbourne or whatever, setting up trial cameras can be super handy. I mean, there's some fantastic ones nowadays that are even 4 and 5G if you've got service in the mountains, that are going to send you a photo of the game. The ethics behind that, I guess, can be a bit questionable sometimes, but it can be, you know, it's probably no difference between the cocky sending you a photo and letting you know that a big buck's you know, walked past this mountain range compared to getting a live photo at the exact same time. But especially in the early stages, it does really help you sort of work out the habits of where animals are frequenting, and also helps you pattern certain animals, especially if you're trying to work out and, you know, get a particular boar or a particular buck or stag or whatever. You know, it also just educates you on the expectations of quality and caliber of animals that could be in an area. And you may see some sign, and it sort of helps with education, because you may see some sign and be like, oh yeah, that's really good and stuff like that. But then you put a camera up and you work out that it's actually, you know, cattle causing that, or that rub instead of, you know, a deer or whatever, or it's goats causing that rub rather than a fallow deer, or you think that there's heaps of pigs using that wallow, but really it just happens that there was one pig that used the wallow the day before you got there and it hasn't been used for a month since, which then just emphasizes, well, you probably should be, you know, depending on the quality of the pig, I guess, but, you know, you should be using or hunting somewhere else. So they are a really, really handy tool. I do take into account, and I like to sort of warn people around trial cameras though, because I can't think of how many times I've been out hunting and had a trial camera out. Not that we use them that often, but we've had it on, just say, a game trail, for example. I normally actually like really putting them on water, to be honest. I find that the most effective way. But, you know, you've got a camera set up on a game trail, and I can't think of how many times I've been sitting on the opposite ridge and watched a deer walk past the trial camera or a pig walk past the trial camera and think, oh my God, I'm going to get such good photos of that. And then you run over there and check it and never even took a photo. And so it can be a really good representation, especially something like dams and wallows of what animals are there. But I've also seen it on dams where, you know, an animal comes to drink and it's like quite far away from the dam. Be like, oh, it should be able to pick it up, you know, even on that other side. And for some reason or another, it doesn't. And, you know, I think it's just keep in the back of your mind that animals, you know, could be using or walking past wherever you've set your camera up by 10 meters. And that means that you're not going to get them on camera. So just because what your camera shows doesn't show the full picture, it does work as a great ally to you and show a snapshot of, you know, the game walking past. But there's plenty of issues that occur with cameras, and there is limitations to cameras. So yeah, just keep that in mind, but definitely a worthy tool, setting up, and also just helping you aid in bringing that complete picture together and hopefully making you more successful on future hunts.
Cayuga broadheads are engineered for success and built by experience. These are the broadheads we trust for all of our bow hunts. Whether it's buffalo and bangtang bulls in Australia's Northern Territory or chital deer along the basalt wall, we have ultimate confidence in their range. I'm currently loving the 150 grain Zots. Regardless of your preferred broadhead, quality and performance is guaranteed across the range. If you would like to try them today or shoot them already and want to restock, head to their website and use code TWIN10, that's TWIN 10 numerically at checkout for 10% off your next order. You will not be disappointed.
Well, legends, hopefully you got a lot out of that podcast. That sort of just details how I would tackle gaining new property and, the tools and tips, I guess, the strategy that I would use to try and learn as much as I can about it. That sort of outlines, the first approach with the property owner and then going into, exploring it myself and just continually learning through the process. A few animal factors there for you guys and just continually sort of building that whole hunt picture and profile out on that particular block. So what we're going to do now is just jump into our FAQ section of the podcast. So if you have a question that you would like to get answered on the podcast, please send that to info@twinalements.com.au with the subject line FAQ. Equally, send us a message on socials, whether that be Twin Elements account, Aiden Doumtsis Outdoors account, or the James Doumtsis Outdoors account, and we'll answer you there and have you on a future podcast. So today we've only got one question just because Aiden had the FAQ question last week where he tackled a heap of your listener questions. So this question got sent in from One Last Drift on Instagram. He said, "Hey mate, which Garmin thing is it that you use to text off? I'm not sure which one to go with. Any help would be great. Cheers." So I personally have the Garmin InReach 2, which is more of a compact one. You can get the Mini if you're looking at getting the most compact version, which is just like the text-based sort of function with the SOS function without actually having the screen. But all of the Garmin InReaches have sort of two-way text messaging functions. Definitely download the app because typing on your phone is a pain in the ass, and especially making sure that the app's like up to date and downloaded, because if it's not downloaded, then you can't use it when you're out of service. But yeah, they've all got the two-way messaging. They've all got the SOS function, which is probably the biggest reason why I carry it. And you can also share your location, which is super handy just for sharing sort of waypoints and stuff between mates, especially on those bigger hunts. I guess the battery life as well needs to be like spoken about, because I charge mine every 12 months. Not that I use it very often, but it's always above like 97% battery. It's phenomenal, like even on these US hunts or New Zealand hunts where you're using it every night to check in with friends and family back home, it still holds its charge really well. But yeah, so I run the Garmin InReach 2. You can get them from Venture Hunting and Outdoors for I think about $675. Aiden has the GPS Map 67i, and so that one's a little bit bigger version. It also has the Topo Map features that he uses, especially when we're away hunting in New Zealand and that type of thing. So that's going to set you back about $1,000 from Venture Hunting and Outdoors. But yeah, whether it's the Garmin GPS Map 67i or InReach 2 or the Mini, the text messaging function is going to work suggested through your phone by downloading the Garmin Messenger app. And I'd also recommend the Garmin Explore app for maps on your phone. We've been using that a fair bit too, and it's been really handy. So just a little bonus there. Check that out. But all three of those Garmin InReach functions are going to work with text messages, and something I definitely mention and think is worthwhile to all people in the outdoors, especially making sure you've got that SOS function to make sure you get home safe to your friends and family. Just a couple of conclusion and last minute wrap ups. As a reward to our loyal listeners, we've set up a unique discount code for all of our prints on the Twin Element website. They've started really rolling out the door now with a fair few orders coming through. I think as people and word of mouth, people order the prints and they've been stoked and they tell their friends and family. And we've just got more and more people, but we just wanted to set up a bit of a loyalty program to you guys, our listeners of the podcast, where we've set up the code the Twin Elements podcast, where you get 10% off any of the prints. So there's 40 prints on there, all different sizes. So yeah, make sure to go and check that out, and they're going to be perfect, whether it be decking out your office or your gym, all the way through to giving someone a gift or a nice housewarming present. So make sure to jump onto the Twin Elements website and check them out. Something to add to the calendar, we've got a big announcement where Venture Hunting and Outdoors is celebrating their 1 year opening anniversary of their Springwood store up in Brisbane there. Aidan and I will be there, and that is going to be happening on the 9th and 10th of August. So make sure to chuck that in your calendar. 9th and 10th of August, big opening, 1 year anniversary for Venture Hunting and Outdoors. There's going to be a fair few people there. It's going to be a huge event. I'm sure they're going to have some great deals. It's going to be a great way for the hunting community to get together and celebrate and just have an awesome time. So Aidan and I will be there. We'll just be hanging out, talking to people, talking hunting, tips and tactics, all the rest of it. So if you want to come down, please do come and say hey to us and come and support a great thing. Venture Hunting and Outdoors do a lot of good things for conservation and really want to be a part of the hunting community. So make sure to get down there and celebrate with us and them. So we'll see you all there 9th and 10th of August. Lastly, I'd just like to say thank you once again from Aidan and I for the love and support that we've been getting through the podcast and through socials and stuff like that. As you can tell, Aidan and I have been trying to step it up this year. We've started the podcast, and there's been a lot going into that, but also just trying to put out as much great content through social media, but also through the YouTube channel. We've got a couple new series that will be starting up shortly. So we've got our Northern Territory adventure where we hunt buffalo, boars and bantang. So that will be starting up in probably July on the YouTube channel. And then we've also been editing up our Against All Odds US hunt into a vlog version. So that will be an 8-part series, which it's just going to be a bit more of a deeper dive. I'm actually going to be narrating the hunt, so it just sort of goes into a bit more of the emotion and the thought process behind the hunt, just because there was so much sort of missed in the shorter sort of 38-minute. It was almost a trailer, really. It was quite fast paced, and we've just sort of slowed it all down, set it up as a bit more of a series, just because, we had Fallow Frenzy and everyone really liked that, where it was sort of coming out every week and you get to follow along the hunt. So we've redone, the film and set it up into 8 parts, just so that you guys can sort of come along and experience it a bit more for yourselves and just see what Aidan and I went through in that 20-day hunt. So, make sure to be subscribed to the YouTube channel, and also make sure to keep up to date with all the content that's coming out there. But once again, thank you for the love and support in every way possible, whether it be following us on the socials or subscribed on our YouTube or subscribed here to the podcast. We love it when you leave a review and rate the podcast. And once again, thank you for everything, and we will catch you on the next episode of the Twin Elements podcast.